Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to the Crush the Quote webinar series. In today's session, we will be talking with Emma Dutton from the Applied Influence Group, who will be discussing what she learned about influence from the Taliban. So allow me to introduce to you our amazing guest speaker today, Emma Dutton, the very excellent, very smart, intelligent, superpower woman.
Hang on a minute. Let's set me up for success. Come on.
Emma served as an engineer officer in the Royal Air Force before transitioning to the influence capability of military intelligence. She led teams to collect life-saving information over 5 tours in Afghanistan and was honored with an MBE in 2015. After this, she realized that the same skills and methodology used to influence the Taliban during those negotiations were as effective with politicians and military commanders involved in the campaigns. So Emma co-founded the Applied Influence Group. And I'm going to not say any more because I would like Emma to talk about what that looked like and how that came about. So Emma, thank you very much for joining us today. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Catherine. Thanks for having me. I'll talk about the current business in a moment, but a bit of the background is that I joined the Air Force 2004, sponsored at university, ended up in an engineering role. That's what I was recruited to do initially. And I did my first tour of Afghanistan as an engineer officer and had a great time. But then I came back from that tour and discovered this world of human intelligence, which there's definitely some people on the call who know what that is, but in military world, human intelligence is essentially collecting information from humans and influencing humans' decision-making versus collecting information from signals intelligence or imagery or something. And I was really attracted to that world because when you distill it down, it's really about building relationships and understanding people, which was fascinating to me. So I went for the selection for that unit and stayed there for the rest of my career and sacked off the engineering world entirely. And I served another four tours of Afghanistan in that role. And the day-to-day of it is much less sexy and exciting than it probably sounds, and is definitely not like Homeland or Zero Dark 30 or anything like that. There's much more, tea drinking and beard stroking and things. And really, when you distill it down, it was creating relationships with people who did not want to initially have a relationship with us, let alone be persuaded by us. And the result of the relationships we were building and the influence we were trying to have with senior Taliban leadership, would-be suicide bombers, smugglers, a whole range of different types of stakeholder. The result of that really was ultimately to change decision-making across the networks, the insurgent networks that we were trying to affect in some way. And often we were trying to change the decision-making of people who we had no direct relationship with. So trying to find a path of influence to a senior leader who's not even in the country, who's in deepest, darkest Pakistan somewhere, but trying to find a path of influence to them via people we did have relationships with was also part of the job. And so we realized the essence of what we were doing was trying to influence, trying to persuade the right people at the right time, in the right way, across a complex network of humans that was changing very quickly to achieve an outcome, to affect decision-making. And when we came out of the military, a few of us left around the same time, and we started to understand a bit more about business and complex sales in particular. We thought, trying to influence the right people at the right time, in the right way, etc., to affect a decision, that sounds a lot like complex sales. So that's what we did. We codified what we'd learned and made it relevant for the B2B complex sales environment. I forgot to have my picture up. That's me looking like a 12-year-old lost in a war zone. I still look 12, so Not much has changed. So the business we've created, the Applied Influence Group, we've built on those experiences, have codified what worked, what didn't, and have made it relevant. And we're laser focused on the human to human channel of complex selling, which we think is probably the most important, but often the most neglected is the human aspect, the human factors. And we do that. We help our clients leverage the human to human aspect effectively with influence campaigns, which is all about helping make this affect this buying decision that we're targeting be favorable towards us, and leveraging the humans to do that. So what are we going to focus on today? So I'm going to take two areas of an influence campaign. One is a tactical thing. So when we talk about influence tactics, we mean human to human. And one is a more influence strategy tool, which is when you're looking at lots of humans. So the first thing I'm going to focus on is how we can be persuasive by understanding intrinsic motivation. And for those of you that have joined more recently, the question I asked everyone earlier, which I'd like to have a think about for me, is what was the thing that was driving you to go for your last promotion, or to move to a different company? What was driving that decision? Just reflect on that for me. And the clue, the sort of, what's the word? Spoiler. The spoiler to all this, of course, is it's not the carrot that really matters. It's what's driving the cartoon man to want the carrot. And that's what we're going to talk about in a moment. And then the strategy tool I'm going to introduce you to, the influence strategy tool, is the influence map. So this is a thing that helps us understand who we need to influence in that complex environment. So, and by the way, this isn't relevant for, super duper strategic complex sales. It is relevant there, but it's not just relevant there. It's also relevant for more simple environments, more transactional environments where there is more than one stakeholder. And of course, being persuasive is really useful. And a lot of salespeople are, whether you're labeled a salesperson or something else, but you're doing a lot of selling, not necessarily of products, but selling of ideas or of change, for example. A lot of people in those roles are naturally very good at being persuasive, but often with the wrong people, or the people who aren't where we need to focus. And that's why understanding who we need to influence needs to be combined with that persuasive element. So that's what I'm going to cover today. So this first area around persuasion. So our model for persuasion is based on understanding 3 dimensions to human motivation. I'm going to focus on one of them today. So 3 dimensions being desire, so things that we want to satisfy; fears that are present when there are threats in our environment. And threats isn't just someone jumping out of a bush with a bat. It's a certain change that threatens our status quo, threatens our position, a new boss, an organizational design change, something like that. And they create fears. So fear is also, the second, and that can be more dominant in our decision making actually than desire. And then the third is our morals, our sense of right and wrong, which govern how we act on those desires and on those fears. So I'm just going to focus on desire today. Okay, so this question around what motivated you to go for your last promotion or the new role that you're in now. What was it that was driving you to make that change?
Hi, Emma. So I am Jack. I'm one of Ben's colleagues who he's kindly invited me along to. Thanks very much. This is really interesting. I've been in my current role working with Ben in underwriting for about a year, slightly longer. Previous to that, I was in the insurance market, but on the claims side. And for me, the key driver wasn't really sort of benefits or anything like that. It was getting into a place of work that was a good fit, which the company fortunately really ticks that box, and then also just a slight change of direction in the type of interaction with the insurance market.
Okay, so Jack, so tell me a bit more, Jack, about, if you don't mind, what that gives you, that change.
Yeah, so so the Lloyd's market is a bit of a funny place. The analogy I use to describe it to people is it's a bit like being back at school, where every year you'll be in a new classroom, new building, but the people, broadly speaking, stay the same, and you're all in a square mile. And I moved around that for the past sort of 4 or 5 years in a variety of roles. I'd been a claims adjuster for 3 years, working sort of on the loss side. And for me, it was a case of sort of getting back more to the trading aspect of insurance. That was the motivation for me.
Yeah. And what was it about the trading aspect that wasn't in the other aspect?
So, I mean, like, it's the face-to-face interaction. A lot of what I was doing was North American based previously. So there was a lot of human interaction, but it was all mostly behind the phone or on a Zoom call when the pandemic hit. And I really, part of what attracted me to the market in the first place was that it was still a human to human trading place where so many aren't.
Jack, thank you so much for sharing that. A few others there. David, a burning building, putting the fire out. Interesting one. Greg, use my very leadership experience to find a role, be more impactful in an authentic and ethical business. Tim, wanting to make a difference to people, using strengths and skills. Roland, personal fulfillment. Roland, what is the personal fulfillment there that you're looking for? Fear of how I could sustain the current role.
There was a time when I felt I knew that I had to keep progressing every year, every 2 years. I just had to keep moving up the ladder, and that there was being stationary was not an option. I suppose, yes, of course, things like savings, finance, but the personal fulfillment was sort of the hunger for change, I suppose, or desire to avoid boredom, one could also say, and knowing deal with a certain amount of I don't like this in my current role. But I like most of my role. I deal with some stuff, but I know that the grass is greener higher up the ladder. I suppose that a little bit of that. Yeah. Got it. That's really helpful. And Kunal as well says career growth, work with really smart people, chance to build a software product. And what did that give you?
I joined because I had worked with a number of the folks at the company now. So I had enjoyed working with them in the past. The growth opportunity was working with there's always an idea we had around building a software product, but it was much easier to do it inside of a large company because they just had the resources available to do that. And then finally, I think from just a pure challenge, I had worked in private equity for one firm, and this was a chance to work with a lot of different firms. I thought that was kind of more invigorating to see how others think as well. So that's kind of the quick nutshell.
Yep, thank you. Okay, well, listen, everyone, thank you very much for sharing that. So before I share the model that we use to understand this desire dimension of motivation, I'll just give you the background of how we came across it. So when we first started operating in the Afghanistan battle space, we weren't very effective actually at doing our job because we just did not understand what was motivating the average person we were trying to build a relationship with, what was motivating them to do the things that they were doing. Pick up the weapon, put the bomb in the ground, rise to the top of the local Taliban network. And we made that horrible assumption that people were joining the Taliban to kick the infidels out of the country, for some sort of religious reason or another, which was sometimes the case and sort of generally in the background, but was almost never the sole motivation. And we started noticing patterns in the things that were driving the behavior that was causing people to be sat in front of us and people whom we were having to build relationships with. And we came across the work of a psychologist called Stephen Rees, who studied human desire for decades. And he came up with a model called the 16 basic desires. And we saw a correlation between this model and the pattern that we were noticing in Afghanistan. And Stephen, I'll show you this in a moment and I'll go through the 16, but Stephen Rees, he concluded that all of us, every human, is motivated by all 16 of these desires. But in each of us, there are a few, usually 3 to 5, which are particularly strong for us. And that's important because if we can identify accurately which of those desires someone is particularly strong in, and we can help them satisfy those desires, we can be persuasive. And the reason we can be persuasive is because we're being personally relevant and resonant with them. But the only known way to change human behavior is through the reward system. And there is no more powerful reward than someone satisfying their intrinsic desire. I'll talk about how I'll give some examples about how we can leverage this and how we can use these desires to create more persuasive messaging. But let me just go through it. So remember the answers you gave and the answers you heard about what made people go for this promotion or their job, and just see what you can spot. These things, by the way, the combination of the desires that we're strong in, they don't make us better or worse people. There's no judgment on any of these. We all have them to a degree. So the first one is power, which is about self-efficacy, really. It's about having an impact and seeing your impact on people and on situations, being able to exercise your agency. Status, so feeling and being seen to be important and special, and people who often like to be the expert in the room, that's often them, their desire for status manifesting in that way. Sometimes it's more, materialistic things, or the number of followers on Instagram a person has got. These things manifest differently. Independence, so being free from the control and decision-making of others, being able to, have your freedom of choice. Stephen Rees calls this vengeance, but really it's about winning, beating other people. So two groups of people, very high in winning: professional athletes and, of course, salespeople. Acceptance, so being accepted by a social group. Order, so people who are high in order will probably be annoyed that that box isn't quite level with the other boxes, because order is all about process and control and consistency. People who are high in order do not like change, etc. Saving, so the accumulation of resources beyond what we need and beyond what is necessary, and in a business context, that is also accumulating and holding on to budget and human resources and the certain experts. You see that quite commonly. Honor, so being consistent with the traditions and the expectations of our group, the group that we belong to. And Stephen Rees talks a lot about those who have a strong sort of sense of loyalty to their parents tend to be strong in honor. So there's a link between honor and one's parents. Idealism, so a really strong sense of justice and a sense of fairness, and wanting the world to be free from harm and equal. Social contact, so not to be confused with extroversion versus introversion. You can have people who are low extroverts who are high in social contact, and that can be a bit of an internal tension. My business partner is one of them. And so social contact is all about having those connections with people. Curiosity, so people who are high in curiosity always need a new challenge, to be learning something deeply, tend to get bored easily. Tranquility, so being in an emotionally stable environment, generally free from conflict, emotional stability. And then these last four are a little bit more basic and not obviously relevant to a business context, but often they are actually, and particularly over situations like the pandemic, where people weren't able to satisfy these desires in the same way, that absolutely would have changed behavior. So hopefully you can see some link between some of the reflections you had on what was motivating you regarding your last promotion, etc., and some of these things here. So what isn't on here? So we're talking about desire. What's not on here that you might have expected?
Which one of these is self-worth?
So Stephen Rees's bottom line is that these things need to be, the things that we are high in need to be satisfied for us to feel that sense of self-worth and fulfillment. So when we talk about, I took this decision, this promotion, whatever, this new job, to feel more fulfilled, That's a very generic response. If we can dig into what was the thing that gave us that fulfillment, that will give us the clue as to which of those desires we were trying to satisfy. But what isn't on here? So someone said increased salary.
Increased salary. Mm-hmm.
Money isn't on here. Fame, the promotion, finishing the project on time successfully. So those things are all gateways to achieving. They're the carrots, not the thing that's making you want to get the carrot. So someone might want to, get the promotion because that gets the higher salary, because that gets them the flashy car. That's the status symbol. But to some people, it might be about taking their family on holiday. To some people, it might be about the promotion gives them the independence, from more in their decision making. So it's about what's the ends that those things are a means to.
The power one, the way you describe power, it wasn't about being in power or having that status, but it was about having the option or the ability to impact and using basically your power for good.
That's right. Yeah.
So I like that description, but then is status then that traditional power thing that people might be looking for?
Yeah, so they can often be confused, power and status. Power is really about being able to have an impact on situations and on people. So to some degree, it's not so much about control, it's about your actions having an effect. And status is more about being special. And you of course get people who have both. I have a stakeholder at the moment in a client who's high in power, status, and winning. Because everything we have to ensure that they're seeing their ideas come into effect, because that's the power bit, they're having the impact, and they're being successful, and that's helping us all win. So it's sort of trying to combine all those things. We're all motivated by status to some degree, and we all have egos, but I think you're right, there's probably a correlation between those who are high in status and what looks to the rest of the world like a high ego. Yeah.
There's another question. Does desire relate to belonging?
Yes, absolutely. And I think the acceptance and social contact are also strongly linked to that sense of belonging. And the point here is that people will change their behavior and will compromise values, will compromise morals sometimes to satisfy these desires, if it's particularly strong. So what's a useful way, do you think, of recognizing, of understanding what desires a person might be strong in? How could we do that, for example? Behaviors, yeah. What do you mean? Just elaborate. Tell me a bit about that.
So the way somebody behaves in situations that are foreign to them would probably tell me what they're
Yes. Yeah, that's a good point. And actually, you're probably talking more about fear there. So in situations that people are less familiar with, are more likely to be threats are more likely to be perceived. So seeing how someone will respond to that and what particular fears result from that could tell you a bit about the desire as well. Go ahead, Marsh.
So I think one of the things that I do, whether it's going for an interview or going to meet a client, like Jack was saying with brokers earlier, is I try and do my research beforehand. So I use open sources of information such as Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn. I try and build a mental picture of who the person is in front of me. So for example, let's say I noticed that you're at Loughborough University. I would try and subtly drop in organically something that is a joint experience or a joint shared love of something, to then exploit that to make them like me that a little bit more and set foundation for success.
Absolutely. So creating that common ground creates that sense of unity, shared identity, which makes people feel more safe and more likely to tell you the rich, useful nuggets of information about these desires, and that give you the clues. Absolutely right. So any of those points of commonality, the better. So bottom line is you can do some research, as you guys have said. Marsh, you said, as some in the chat, know what to listen for. Yes, go ahead.
Sorry, I think that the most important one would be the situation.
Yeah.
So like people commonly they might have a very common desires, but situations is the one which lead the pathway. So everyone would have a different desire in different situations. So if it is a family base, if it is a government situation, if it is intelligence environment, or if it is a business level. So those situations are the one which identify the desires. So in a situation where you work in an environment of government, most of the time, those desires will not apply to a situation where you work for a non-profit organization, or in a just a personal level. Maybe the most important desire would be your family, but in a different situation where you work for a gang group, the family will no longer be something to be considered. Or depends on those situations and the environment. Those things would be very different.
Yes, yeah, I think you're right, and you can draw some, I think, reasonable assumptions about the average person who works in a non-profit, for example, is probably going to be high in idealism. The average person who works in public sector, career-long public sector person, often has desires around honour, because it's about the honourable, doing the right thing with public money, that kind of thing. So yeah, you can gain a lot about someone's career history, which I'll talk about that a bit in a moment. But just touching on this point around sort of picking up on the clues, I'm just going to tell you a very quick story about a particular lad I was talking to in Afghanistan, and just see if you guys can phone in on what you think he was motivated by. So there was a particular group of men who had been detained by UK forces, relatively red-handed, in essentially a bomb factory, and amongst them was this young lad called Gul Mahmad, who wasn't in the main group actually when they were sort of detained. He was sort of round the back, but he was definitely part of the group, and he had known insurgent contacts in his phone. We know who he was. He was a low-level, relatively up-and-coming local commander who had growing responsibility in this particular network. And initially, sort of early on in the building relationship with him, he was adamant, he knows nothing about Taliban. Who's the Taliban? Never heard of those. Doesn't know anyone, blah, 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 blah. He was there to help, to get help with his farmers, his father's farming. Everyone in Afghanistan is a subsistence farmer mostly. So that was his initial position. Eventually realized he had, nowhere really to go, and started to progress along the sort of the acknowledgement of the reality of things, and eventually acknowledged he was there to help these people, but he didn't know that they were Taliban. I didn't know they were making explosives. I was just there to sort of help them carry things, transport things around on my moped. And eventually he said the reason he wanted to help these men out is because they gave him that moped. And we knew he was truthful about that because of the other intelligence we had on this young lad. And I also knew from building the relationship with him that he was the youngest of 3 sons of a very poor family, even by Afghanistan's rural Helmand standards, very poor. Unlikely probably to get a secure marriage because his family couldn't afford the dowry. Probably never been outside of, I think it was certainly no more than 20 miles, probably less than that circumference around his compound. His life was largely work in the fields, reading the Quran, going to the mosque. And then the Taliban come along and give him a moped. So what does that tell you about Gul Mahmad's motivations, do you think?
He finally felt like he was worth something.
Yeah, probably finally felt a bit of acceptance What else?
Giving him some independence.
Definitely.
See the world, go beyond 20 miles.
Some curiosity, yep. And in Afghanistan, particularly then, possibly a bit less so now, that's a huge status symbol to have a moped. So they've ticked off. So like all they've done is given this guy a moped, and they've hit a number of his desires. So that was really interesting to me. So we sort of pulled on that thread a bit, and it was actually became a bit of a turning point in that case, because it allowed us to frame our messages to Gul Mohammad around some of those motivations that came out, which just opened up whole new avenues of inquiry for us with him and some of the others. So the point is, if you know what clues to listen for, you can start to map these. So for example, if you guys hear a stakeholder, a customer, a client, whoever say, I was ready to step up. I took this new job because I was ready to take a step up, take more responsibility. I wanted to have a bigger impact. What's that?
Power.
Yep. I joined this business because what they're doing is really interesting and innovative and cutting edge, and I wanted to be part of that. What might that tell you?
Curious.
Yeah, probably a combination of curiosity and status. I wanted to join this business because I really respect their approach to sustainability. They've got a solid ESG strategy. What the impact they're having on the world is something I want to be a part of. Idealism, yeah. So bottom line to all of this is all of us are motivated by all of these to a degree. We are strong in a handful, and we change our behavior to satisfy those in particular. That's true for me, for you, Gul Mohammad, and every single person you are trying to influence or sell to. So if we can frame a message to satisfy that, if we can frame how we communicate and the problems we're trying to help them with around this understanding, we can be much more persuasive, because it's tapping into that reward system, which is the only way to change behavior. So let's take two quickly. We'll do order and status. What I'm going to show you now is just a tailored version of one of our clients' standard product messaging aligned to these two desires. This doesn't exist, by the way. We've created this. This is part of an influence campaign that we're in flight with at the moment. So to speak to order, it's about control, it's about organizing, it's about consistency. You can monitor everything from a single console, reduce all the, the complexity of it, etc. That's going to resonate with someone strong in order much more than someone who's low in order. With status, this is innovative, it's modern, it's highly regarded, going to give you an opportunity to showcase that you're at the forefront of this XYZ. Again, speaking to someone who's strong in status. So if you can start to take your basic messaging and make it relevant to a number of different desires that you think are common across a group of people, or a number of desires that you think are strong in a person, then you're much more likely to hit those intrinsic motives. And what tends to happen in all sales, not just technology, we're particularly focused on technology, but is we tend to be focused on product and feature and function and business case and technical value and sometimes financial value. And those things are, you need those things. This doesn't replace that, but they're informative. They're not persuasive. Another way just quickly to talk about identifying them is using open source research, which Ben Marsh, you talked about. So let's give an example of that. But what is the danger of using open source research to try and identify someone's motivations?
It's a projection of their best self often.
Yeah, it's curated, isn't it? But and that can be useful in a sense. So let's do this as an example. This is my business partner, Dan Connors. Some of you know him. So if you don't know Dan and you're looking at this, this is just a screenshot of his his Facebook page, which is locked down, but this is what you can see if you're not friends with him, you just go on his Facebook page. Which desires do you think Dan is strong in based on this information? Time in the armed forces, university education, got his hometown on there, and obviously that quite strong visual imagery.
Tranquility, definitely.
Yep, tranquility.
Physical exercise.
Yep.
Honor.
Yep. And what was the clue for honor?
Armed forces, services.
Yeah, yeah, and it's an assumption, but it's better than no information. And as long as you hypothesis test, that's okay. You're correct in this case. But what else?
Independence.
Independence. Yep. Okay, so the point is, you don't know this guy, and in 30 seconds, you formed an assessment that's about 80% accurate. It's not always that easy, but it often is. Let's try again. Let's talk about me. Right, so if you go on my LinkedIn, this is my LinkedIn career history. If you go on my activity and you look at the things that I interact with and post, when you take away all the stuff that's about my business, what you're left with is some sort of cause. It's me talking about Afghanistan, collecting poppies. What are my desires, do you think?
Power.
Power. By the way, got thick skin, no judgment on any of this. just go for it.
Independence, acceptance.
Independence.
And
what was the clue for independence and power?
Well, you're CEO and a co-founder, right?
Yeah.
And also making a difference, want to make an impact, petitions.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Which is about, and what's that about?
Idealism.
Idealism. Yep. Mm-hmm. Some people sometimes say status because of the MBE thing. There are some people who pay lots of money and put lots of time into getting an MBE. I was not one of those. I had no control over it. Didn't know until I got a phone call on the bus. But of course I use it because it's useful for my business, because that gives me my independence. So again, you are entirely correct. My biggest ones are power, independence, idealism, a bit of winning as well, curiosity. Okay, so as we established earlier, being persuasive, tapping into this intrinsic motivation stuff is useful, but only if we're persuading the right people. So I'm interested, what do you guys currently do to understand a stakeholder landscape, whether you're in a formal sales role or you might not be labeled as such, but you're needing to navigate stakeholder environments? What tools do you use to understand those? Org charts, power maps, what sort of things?
I don't tend to use those things. I would be more of a human to human contact, so build rapport with people. Probably
yes,
should do a little bit more background research, but that's how I go straight in.
Well, yes, look, and on a tactical level, building that rapport one-to-one is critical. And what I'm interested in is when you've got lots of people involved in a decision that you're trying to influence, a buying decision or otherwise, how do you understand what that landscape looks like?
You got to map out all the players, all the decision makers, who's got the influence.
Yep. And often we use, certainly in our work we do with sales teams, account teams in mostly technology businesses, a default is to use org charts and power maps, so sort of looking at hierarchies and things. That stuff is useful, but what's the limitations of an org chart? So if I'm trying to influence a buying decision, I'm selling a complex technology product or a complex insurance product, and there are 4 or 5 people involved in that decision. There's another 20 people influencing it, and each of those 4 or 5 differently. There's probably some competitors I need to be aware of and their relationships. There's probably some partners. There might be some junior analysts doing some research that's informing the decisions. There might be 30 people there. What's the limitations of an org chart in that situation?
Well, the org chart just simply maps out the structure of the org. It doesn't actually tell you who's influencing who and who has influence.
Or the strength of the relationship between people.
Yes. And it's often also limited to the target organization, the customer or the client. and neglects other humans that might be relevant, but are in other networks, other organizations. So believe it or not, when we started operating, again, when we weren't very, very good at this, we were using org charts to try and understand insurgent networks in Afghanistan. Can you imagine the local Taliban leadership in Helmand province having an org chart in the compound wall, you know, with not just our Western military lens on it, and was utterly useless. So we needed another way. And so we developed this thing called the influence map. So what's along the x-axis here, the horizontal, is what is that individual's impact on our specific mission, our specific objective? You could talk about in an account generally, in a client generally. You can also make it very specific, but you need to know what context you're mapping. So in this case, I'll talk about at a deal level. We're trying to influence a specific buying decision of some kind. So along that horizontal, that individual's specific impact. And often what we find is some people we assume are highly important because of their hierarchy, a CIO, chief procurement officer or something, are actually not particularly important to this specific decision for lots of reasons. So it's useful to understand that that context. And then up the vertical, we have our relationship with them. So what's the level of our influence, our ability to change their decision making currently? And when we do this as teams, you need to be clear about which of us we're talking about, because we'll all have different relationships, but whoever's got the highest relationship with that individual is the one generally that will plot. And then you can start to map the relationships between them too. And so to share an example, here is a redacted example. We can see here that we've got a relatively weak start state, I'd say. We've got, very common to see this pattern, a concentration of stakeholders in the bottom right who are highly impactful on us achieving this objective, but with whom we have zero relationship currently. A couple of stakeholders up here. There's no one in the top left, and the top left stakeholders there tend to be really good sources of information, potentially useful influence agents if they've got good relationships with people in the bottom right. But the people in the top left and the bottom left can't really move us on their own, but they can be useful in other ways. And we've also got this person up here who at the moment looks like a single point of failure. And we know a little bit about the relationships. And these lines are dotted because we don't know. We're assuming, we've got a good assumption, but we don't know. So what this is also telling us is where our knowledge gaps are. We don't know very much. We've got a load of people down here and a load of people down here. So these people we know are important, but we have no relationship with, and we're not sure enough about them to even put them on the map. And these people, we don't even know how important they are. So it's revealed the unknown unknowns and can start to direct our efforts. So whether you've got one or two people making a decision, or many more on the surface, there's always more people behind that influencing it, and it keeps expanding out as you learn more. So in this situation, you've got this person here as a partner of our client, and they've got a much better understanding of this client, of this customer that we're trying to influence than we do. So we can go and sit down with them and learn, enrich our map with their knowledge. So anyway, we can come up with a few different deductions from this and then keep it live. So it's a living thing. So 2 weeks later, in this case, this is about 2 months old now, it looked like this. So BC is down here because we realised our relationship was not what we thought it was. We've added several more stakeholders now and built some more relationships. And we've got a bit more of an understanding of the relationships between them. So 2 weeks later, it's expanded a bit, and that will keep happening. Bottom line here is, and I'll send out some sort of summary points with the slides. Don't ever forget gatekeepers, so EAs. can often be moderately impactful, but have super important relationships you need to be aware of. Don't ever forget about competitors, not necessarily because you want to influence them, but because you need to understand the nature of their relationships, because that's going to be impacting on the decision making of the people you are trying to influence. Don't ever forget things like the more junior influencers who might actually be doing a lot of the work that's feeding into a decision. And keep it live. Try and get a fast feedback loop going on this, so you can see and measure your progress over time. It's a good management tool as well, so you can show how the situation is changing and what you've done to do that.
A question. Sorry. So you talked later theoretically about the influences versus how we can influence people or groups, but I was looking to see what were those common points or desires which were like effective on influencing into this group, and which one was more effective. Was that members, human, family, power, which money, which one was the most effective?
In which group?
On the group you're talking about, the Taliban.
So that there wasn't really a particularly standout motive. I don't think there is in any group by region. I think there's commonalities among things like professions. So the point earlier, people who are drawn to non-profit organizations tend to have a strong idealism streak, etc., that kind of thing. Sports people, sales people tend to be strong in winning, and I think need to be strong in winning to do what they do. But in terms of regional patterns, I don't know what the data says about that, and I don't have any of my own experiences that would suggest that there is one. But what was certainly true was that the notion of Taliban stakeholders wanting to kick the infidels out the country, and that sort of quite blunt instrument of a religious motivation was never the case. It's much more complicated than that in every individual. Sorry to disappoint. There's no silver bullet. Yeah.
I know that's I grew up there, and I know how complex and how difficult would be to give such an answer. But I know, like religion, all these things is just a play. Like
it's an excuse a lot of the time, isn't it? Yeah.
I know those things are not the influence, but I was thinking maybe that power or the money, but those are not very effective. But maybe the stakeholders or the regional players might be one of those. But yeah, I know. Thank you.
So I think whether it's rising to the top of the Taliban or rising to the top of a bank or rising to the top of a small consultancy, anyone that is motivated to be senior in an organization has probably got some degree of power in there, I would say, but not necessarily. So I wouldn't say it's any different for whether you're analyzing the Taliban as an organization versus any other. But it's a really good question.
Seems like it's a hot topic and people want to talk more about it. So perhaps we should schedule a second version of this in the very near future. Fantastic. So Emma, why don't we schedule, we'll add another one into the schedule, and we'll put the notification out there. Thank you so very much. Totally amazing. Thank you all for your amazing questions and engagement. It was great having you join us today, and we'll catch you on the next webinar.